Welcome to the Truth, Lies, and Consequences podcast. I'm your host, Ebony Turner.
And I'm your host, Charity Hill.
In today's episode, I think it's going to be definitely fun. Hey, we're starting a new year. Welcome to 2021. Usually, everybody's got goals and things that they want to accomplish in the new year. So we thought it was only fitting to talk about goals in this episode, just to get the year started off right. As we thought through how we wanted to approach it, though, we realized that we can't just dive right into goals before we talk about the things you got to do before you get to the goals. So before you figure out how you want to do something, you have to first figure out what it is you want to do, why you want to do it, and then you get to the point of how you want to do it. So we break that down into the what, which we call vision, the why, which would be the purpose, and the goals is going to be the how you do it. So these three things we consider the keys to success in accomplishing your goals. You got to have the what, you got to have the why, and you got to have the how. The dictionary talks about success as the achievement of something desired, planned, or attempted. If you're going to attempt and try to complete your goals, you've got to have the vision and the purpose.
Yes.
And I think a great example, Charity, for that is when we think about our podcast, right? As a goal achievement, It's something that we set out to do. 6 months ago was it? I don't even know. It was like back in.
We talked about the podcast in April of 2020. So actually, that's been about, I guess, 10 months ago.
Wow. Cannot believe it's been that long. So it's something that, really just started from an idea, a thought. I called you up one day. We were in the midst of quarantine still, and we were doing our check-in, and I brought up the idea of why not start a podcast? Like, that's the what, right? And you were all in and say, hey, let's do that. That sounds like a fun thing to do. And the idea about like the what we wanted was just an opportunity to have a productive hobby of something to do, but then also provide valuable and thoughtful content. There's a lot of information, a lot of stuff out there. So just to be able to provide something positive, valuable, and thoughtful was one of the what or the vision that I think for me that I had for the podcast. So the first step was deciding what it is we wanted. And then after that, right, Charity, we decided the purpose of it, like why we wanted it.
Yes, we kind of came down to thinking about our personal experiences and how those things could help other people also in their lives and what it is that they're going through. You know, we're two young adult Christian Black women in America. So we have a lot of different perspectives on a lot of different things. So by sharing our personal experiences and kind of what worked for us, what didn't work for us, I think those stories and sharing those experiences were going to be beneficial to listeners who kind of looked and thought and embrace the world similar to us. And even if they didn't, it still give a different perspective to some people. So that definitely was our why for having a podcast and using the skills that we had acquired in our own lives, having communication backgrounds, working in radio spaces and whatnot. It's like we have these skill sets. We enjoy that type of entertainment ourselves. You know, we decided to go ahead and pursue that as well. And look, here we are.
Right. Here we are 10 months later. When you think about that time frame that has elapsed, right? The first step we took after we figured out what it was we wanted, had our vision, why we wanted it. When we think about the process toward the goal achievement and getting an end product, we had to get started. I mean, it's one of those steps that you would think about like, well, duh, but to get to point B, C, D, whatever you want to get to down the road, the very first step you have to do is get started. So the hurdles to getting started could be paralysis of analysis. You're overthinking, well, what about this? What about that? You think of all the steps that you have to do going forward. For us, like, we don't have the equipment, we don't have a studio. But one of the things that we realize is, well, what do we have, right? We do have access to a cell phone. We do have access to an app, the Anchor app, that allows us to, for anybody who wants to start one, the Anchor app's pretty awesome. We have an app that allows us to record it. We've got the video where we can see each other, even if we're not in the same location, because we're trying to be safe with the quarantine and everything else. So we have our own at-home studio. But the thing about it was, right? But at the end of the day, we had to, number one, get started. And number two, we had to just use what we had. And I also think about like just with the podcast, but on a personal level, when I think about a personal goal that I've had. So about a little over a year now, I had a goal of losing weight. And so I needed to get down about 40 pounds. And I am proud and happy to say that as of right now, I have accomplished that goal. And actually, I've reset the goal, and I want to lose a little bit more weight to get kind of my fat percentage down, the muscle percentage down, or where I want it to be. But even
the ratio,
right? But even with that goal, a year or so ago, right, I said I got to get started. So one of the things with that and getting started with the weight loss goal was starting to get more active. So I started to go on walks. That's the easiest thing I could do, because you can't go from 0 to 60. You got to start somewhere. So the first thing that I did was started to go on long walks. Now, of course, the weather was a little bit nicer when I first started, so it was a little easier to go on walks. But even sometimes when it's colder out, you just wait for the sun to come out, maybe noonday, a little bit later. And oftentimes you could still go on a walk even when it's winter season or other times of the year. But
yeah, living in South Carolina, it helps with the weather here to be able to do that throughout different seasons, because once the sun comes out, you're pretty good to go.
Exactly. It's not like you got to fight with the snow or stuff like that.
No, thank God. No.
Yeah. And so I think this next step was we determined what motivated us. And I think it just in goals in general, when I think of the weight loss goal or even with the podcast, we had to figure out what would motivate us to keep us going. So we talked about the purpose and the why. And oftentimes that is enough to keep people going, right? So, for me, it was for the weight loss piece of it. My health is important. I knew that when you have extra weight, that makes you more susceptible, not makes you going to get a disease or something like that or have issues, but you think about like hypertension, stroke, heart attack, like all these other types of things. The first thing they're going to tell you is that you got to increase your activity level, eat better, and you got to lose weight. So for me, it was definitely important for my health to be at an optimal weight for that purpose. And then from the podcast, what motivated me was when we got people listening. Right. When I understood that people actually were kind of tuning in and listening, then for me, it's like, okay, I want to make sure that I do my best, that we do give content that people may be interested in, that we take our time to do our outlines, think through what we want to talk about. So just knowing that one person, two people, that's still valuable to me, that somebody's tuning in and taking their time to listen. So I want to make sure that their time is valuable. Right.
Yes.
And then the next step for goal achievement, assessing your need for accountability is another thing that we thought about. For the podcast, I wanted to do it, but I know for by myself doing it, I probably 10 months later, I probably still would have been like, yeah, that'd be a good idea to do a podcast, right?
We'd have the same conversation, like, yeah, girl, what happened to the podcast?
We would have.
And I'd be like, like, oh yeah, you did talk about that. I forgot about that. Because that happens so easy.
Doesn't it?
Ideas come in your mind and keep going. It's like, I didn't circle back around to that. So yeah,
like I'm still trying to get it going. More about that later, right? Yeah.
But we didn't do that this time. We didn't do it.
And I think one of the differences, one of the keys were that we had a buddy system, or we had someone, if we weren't doing it by ourselves, we had someone else to do it with. Now, some goals, like for my weight loss goal, I didn't necessarily have to have a buddy system. I was self-motivated enough to get that to a point where there was one point where I did have to get into like an exercise program and like a trainer, because I realized that I was losing some momentum. So I did have to get accountability there, but I didn't have to necessarily get accountability to get started, but I had to get accountability to keep going. But with the podcast, I needed accountability to get started and to get it going as well. It's like for both pieces of it. So just determining and assessing your level of self-motivation, and do I need somebody to help me get started? Or if I don't need somebody to help me get started, do I need a buddy to help me keep going? Like, do I need a gym buddy? Do I need a walking buddy? Or whatever other project or goal that you might be trying to reach. Just thinking through that piece of where on the scale of self-motivated or I need a buddy, where do you fall on that? And just being honest with yourself, and then just getting help when you need help.
Yes, I'm a buddy person. I need a buddy to get started, and I like a buddy to keep going, because I feel like I'm more accountable to that person, even if I'm not necessarily accountable to the work. So even if I'm not meeting all the steps that I want to at that point, at least I want to say the next time I talk to them, I want to have something that I've accomplished, if not the whole thing. Well, I did get this far, or I have edited this many minutes of the episode, or I did at least walk half of the mile, not the a whole. So that's just me. I feel that having to admit where I am and how far I've come is more of a motivator than me, because I can talk myself out of myself. That's really easy for me to do. I have that inside conversation. I'm like, yeah, girl, we don't have to do that today. And then it's like, oh, well, no one was accountable and we're in the same spot. So it definitely takes a team on certain goals that need to be accomplished. And I like to be a team player as well. Like with the podcast, when you said, hey, you want to come on board? I was like, sure, I'll come on board. I got stuff that I could help to contribute to that. So joining forces, I always feel is an easier way to kind of accomplish goals when you kind of have a teammate and you can use each other's strengths in different areas to be able to push the narrative forward. So that definitely is something that works for me. But yeah, everyone's different. You got to kind of determine which one works best. Some things are more self-motivated versus others.
And it's more fun to do it together, definitely, than it is to do it on your own. And then I think the other step around goal achievement is creating the deadlines, right? And being realistic about your deadlines.
So with the podcast, I know definitely deadlines have been a driving force for us to be able to make sure we keep checking in with each other and making sure we were making the progress we wanted. So setting a deadline, we're going to record by this day, then we're going to, have it edited by this day, and then we're going to check back and both of us listen through it and see if we like it to drop it by this day. So if we have a certain date we want the release to be, we got to kind of do some steps prior to make sure it gets to that place, or you're just going to keep moving that date further and further away. So I think that's definitely motivated us to keep moving. So like how we were saying, we started talking about the podcast by April of 2020. Then by that June and July, we had recorded an episode. We had recorded our promo. We had selected a logo. So those were the things that we kind of set up during the months of May and early part of June and along into July for us to kind of keep that momentum going. So then by August, we had a release date for the first episode. And that kind of was like, hey, we're here. It's really happening. And then to keep that same momentum of doing more episodes, just to go along with your weight loss example, that's something I'm always constantly trying to work on. But this year, I'm trying to be more intentional in focusing on that. And it's a matter of also having your deadlines, but being realistic with your deadlines. So you're not going to just drop 50 pounds in 5 days. It's not happening, people. So you want to start with something that's more realistic, maybe lose 5 pounds over a couple weeks. So, if you're cutting back, you're drinking your water, you're doing your activity, it could kind of fluctuate in a time span that's more reasonable. For myself, I'm trying to give myself 3 months to lose 15 pounds. So I'm thinking that's 5 pounds a month. Like I feel as long as I'm consistent and stay on top of myself and keep moving and being intentional, I want to hopefully at least move in that direction. Even if I don't make all the way to the 15, I need to be less than where I am. So even in that, it's taking the small victories of if I don't make 15, if I made the 10 in the 3 months, okay, at least I'm moving in the right direction and not going the other way. So, but I feel like your deadlines and your goals and being realistic, that you have to always kind of keep that into perspective so you don't get overwhelmed and then you just quit. So that's an approach that I feel is necessary. And you always want to evaluate your progress as you're moving along in the process. So if you're doing a certain workout and it's not necessarily giving you the results that you're looking for or at a space of plateau, you want to maybe change up your routine and do something different. I know you said you did the trainer, so that kind of helped change up your routine from just doing the walking and then switching over to a trainer. So of course that trainer probably had you doing some different moves and some different exercises. So that was able to propel you to keep moving forward in your weight loss goal. And then just the small victories of feeling a difference in your clothes, taking the time to look at that.
You're right about that, Charity.
Okay.
So that's the biggest thing with the clothes piece for me. So sometimes the scale, as a weight loss example, when you think about your progress, the scale does not tell you where you really are. Sometimes it takes a minute for it to catch up. So sometimes you got to really go by the fact that, my jeans actually, I don't have to pull so hard to get in. It's not as snug and tight. And this shirt is not looks like my little sister's shirt today. It's like the little things like that you have to look at, because your body composition could be changing but it's not shown on the scale yet. So just continuing along that, taking that small little bitty win that you have of like, okay, yeah, my clothes are feeling a little different. So I'm gonna keep going on the journey and the path that you're on. So it's important to see the small little wins that you have, that small little progress, and celebrate that, and making the adjustments of, you know, like you're talking about with your goal of trying to do 15 and going along that process. And if you find that, hey, I'm not really necessarily achieving that, well, maybe it's because the goal was a little ambitious to start with. So to make sure that you don't stop, you don't stop altogether. You just reevaluate and say, okay, maybe that was too big, too broad. Maybe I'll just focus on a weekly basis, like trying to lose 1 pound a week. And then within that 1 pound a week, I want to have X amount of minutes of activity level in that week. And then I want to make sure that my calorie count is X amount within that week for the whole week. Right. So that means if I overindulge a little bit one day, that means I got to probably eat a little less the next day. So those are three things that you'll focus on. And then that way, those smaller goals will help you reach that bigger goal. And I guess only to say, when you think about your progress, sometimes you have to flip it, because the 15 or whatever the number is might be like further away. But when you bring it a little bit closer and a little bit smaller and like a baby step goal, it helps you to be able to look at that progress a little bit actively. Because if you wait for a month or 2 months, you might not be able to correct or make the adjustments. But if you're looking at it like every week, I want to do this, then you can easily the next week make the adjustments you need to make before you got 2-3 months later, like, oh, I didn't meet my goal, right? So I think that's another key of like, when you're evaluating your progress and making the adjustments, make sure you set the goal in a way that allows you to adjust before you get too far away from the goal you're trying to accomplish. So that's one of the things that I found helpful in some of the goals I've had, especially with the weight loss goal too.
Yeah. And then the evaluation is a constant process as much as achieving the goals. They kind of go hand in hand. So it's just a part of it to keep you on track.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about it is just making sure that you're treating the progress as information only. And that's important because if you treat it as an indicator of success or failure, that's going to demotivate you. So if you look at the scale and say, oh, well, today I'm a little bit lighter and tomorrow I'm a little bit heavier, or wherever you are, just look at it as this is just an information point, and I'm taking this information to know what adjustments I need to make, but don't interpret it as the success or failure of the overall goal. That's helpful because you can get demotivated very quickly if you look at it from that means I'm not making any progress at all. Not necessarily. That just means today it might be a little heavier. Make the adjustment so that tomorrow, or actually also give yourself a little more time, because you can look at the scale different days, it might be a different weight. So maybe it's like, okay, maybe today, but I'll wait to the end of the week to really assess what real adjustments I need to make. But like I said, look at it as just an information point, but not as an indicator of success or failure.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I looked at it this morning and I was not happy. I was like, what happened?
Listen, no.
So information. It's
just
information.
Look at it as information. Right. Look at it and then because the focus needs to be on what your goal is and what your steps are to get to that goal. And then you're using the weight scale as just information. And then you adjust maybe some of the steps. But the scale itself is really no value other than a checkpoint. That's it. I've had those moments. We've all had those moments where you look at the scale and you're like, oh.
I think the scale knows. I think they set them up to be that way. Because I'm like, I know you said this yesterday and you changed on me.
Yeah.
But it's okay. I'm motivated. It's information. I'm glad you gave me that word. It's information.
It's information. That's it.
But even with the podcast, okay, we just put out that first episode. We're like, hope somebody likes it. But then, we start gaining listeners. And then some of the listeners we had were people I knew specifically. So I was like, yo, give me a little bit of feedback. What was it you liked? What was it you didn't care for? And then we kind of made alternations as we saw fit that still worked with the way we wanted, the style. And then we just took notes. We wanted to maybe slow down our pacing or kind of make sure we fully think out our thoughts of what it is that we want to say. So that kind of helped us give us some feedback. So as we kept doing more episodes, we gradually felt we were getting better and was getting the product that we were really wanting to achieve so that people could really enjoy and keep listening to the show. So getting that feedback or not meeting the goal that you necessarily set from the top is not a bad thing. Like you were saying with the scale, it's just an indicator of information to help you readjust so you can stay on track for what it is that you really want to get.
Exactly.
So yes, that's a really good way of putting that. It's just information. Love it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
And then after you get to a certain point where you keep readjusting and getting things accomplished, and then you meet the goal. And with the podcast, we put out that first episode, we had met our initial goal. So now we're at a place we're setting new goals. We want to kind of build the listenership, expand the different topics that we talk about. So it's something for everybody that they can listen to and find a nugget of information that could be helpful to them. And then hopefully we're going to be able to put out some more content in 2021 so that we can continue to be successful in this podcast. It's something I know I enjoy. I believe you've enjoyed. You're still here. So we can kind of keep that momentum going and maybe also opening up our podcast to other platforms such as YouTube going forward in the future as well. And you met your weight loss goal, and now you're trying to kind of readjust some new goals in that space.
So when I initially started, it was like, well, let's just drop the fat first and then start working on the muscle. And for me, I needed one goal at a time. So it was like, first goal, you just focus on just getting to the weight that I wanted to get to. And then as my next goal is now to work on the toning. And like you said, trying to figure out, do I need to do a gym or can I do it at home? Get some weights and start doing that process as well. I've got my bike actually in my bedroom, so not too far from my bed. And I got my mat too. So I'm able to get up, do my workouts and everything right there. That way, you just get up and go do it. That way you don't have to really think about it too much, right? You can just get up and do it. So just continuing to do that. So maybe it would be a matter of bringing like a weight or something and having that in the same area so that I can just go ahead and do those to reach that next goal of toning and just losing 5 or 6 more pounds. So, but definitely. And then after I do that, then an idea of maintaining that weight and continuing the diet and things like that. So yeah, absolutely.
So just to kind of get me at a forward momentum with the 15 pounds. And then I was going to reassess and then figure out what was my new number going to be after that point. Because I feel like when I look at the bigger number, it just seems overwhelming. So I'm like, nope, you need to do a smaller number and then a smaller time period. And then just getting the ball rolling on the hill. And then once it's rolling, then I can kind of be like, okay, do I want to, it's a snowball effect. Like, do I want to keep the snowball building and moving in that direction? So, and then, possibly I could work on, toning up certain things or weightlifting over here, but I just want to move down.
Yeah.
So,
no, that makes sense.
Everyone's different. Everyone's different when it comes, to what it is that your long-term goal is pertaining to that. Yep.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Well, I'm so glad we had this conversation. It certainly motivated me in you sharing your experiences. And then I know, us talking about the podcast is a collective experience. Yep. So that's something we're both working on together to maintain. And hopefully a lot of the listeners today can relate, even if it's not a weight loss goal or you want to make a podcast, these same steps of getting started, determining what motivates you, having accountability, creating deadlines and being realistic in them, evaluating your progress, and setting new goals. All of those steps are definitely things that you all can take and use in your 2021 aspirations.
And feel free to check out our Facebook page and add any additional tips that you found helpful as you've been achieving your goals, or share any of the goals that you have for 2021. And as the group, we can help support each other and give a little bit of that accountability that we talk about, because we do it together. It's like we said, it's a little more easy. So,
yep. Well, thank you for listening to this episode of Truth, Lies, and Consequences. We'll see you next time.